Greetings and welcome once again to the Gaming Codex, the show where I try to explain to you all the various words and terms used to describe video games and the video games industry. Today's term is that of ray tracing, and what exactly is that? Well, according to a general definition in computer graphics, ray tracing is a rendering technique for generating an image by tracing the path of light as pixels in an image plane and simulating the effects of its encounters with virtual objects. The technique is capable of producing a very high degree of visual realism, usually higher than that of typical scanline rendering methods, but at a greater computational cost. Now, you may know this from the show I made about it, but we're on the Gaming Codex now, and I'm going to try to condense everything into just 5 or 6, 7 minutes. Ray tracing is really neat. But when applied to video games, there is the problem of it not being all that realizable on account of it costing a lot of computational resources. You need to fill the screen with enough rays so that you get an actual clear image, otherwise you're gonna get a bunch of luminous dots that if you squint hard enough will look like an actual image. That is something that you could do in real time. But to get an actual pristine, pixel perfect image with ray tracing, you need very powerful hardware that may have been announced last evening, as I'm recording this show before the Nvidia presentation of its new Turing architecture and the video cards associated with it. And I'm imagining that they will show some ray tracing there, because ray tracing was announced also as a component of the DirectX 12, with some demonstrations that use ray tracing to a certain degree. If the hardware announced last night is actually all that's cracked up to be, going from needing 4 big Voltas to just one Turing card to render that Star Wars scene, then we will be in the situation in which you can have a video game that uses a lot of ray tracing in the rendering of its graphics, meaning that all the lighting will be accurate. No more need for screen space occlusions, no more need for volumetric shadows or shadow blobs, or all sorts of tricks to make the light look like it's globally generated but it's actually just baked in when the map was built and cannot be altered no matter how many lights you shoot out. All those tricks will be pointless, because all those tricks were made to do was compensate for the fact that we could not do ray tracing. I know there have been some ray tracing demos in the past of video games, like I believe there was the Wolfenstein that nobody liked that did that, but there you mostly got ray tracing in the form of reflections, and that's it. That's what they were touting. Shadows were basically non-existent, mostly. The fine details of how the light bounces in the scene, they weren't really a thing. They were just made as demonstrations to show off a potential of a technology that never panned out. But here, at this moment in time, if that hardware really exists and is actually capable of doing what they promise it to be able to do, then we are going to see something great, which leads us to the popular definition, that being that it looks amazing, and it does. Ray tracing is photorealism. The main thing that keeps games from looking actually photorealistic is lighting, which is why games tend to look their most real in very particular lighting conditions, like when it's cloudy, when there's not a lot of direct sunlight, where there are very few shadows that you would see in the real world. You've seen that in Metal Gear Solid 5 when it was overcast. The game at that point looked realistic because the textures were scanned in from the real world, and the one element it couldn't really do perfectly, the lighting, that was muted. It was limited to the point where it wasn't as much of a factor and the entire world looked, for an instant, realistic. You also got the same effect during rain in some racing games, going all the way back to I think 2010, 2008. They used to look a bit kind of realistic, because in those particular lighting conditions, you could emulate the real world with next to nothing in terms of computational power, compared to what you would need for proper ray tracing of a fully lit, sunny day. I mean, just take this video of Quake 2 that was modified to use ray tracing. It doesn't necessarily look like it's complete, because, you know, you're seeing individual rays or pixels with black bits between them, because it doesn't have the necessary amount of rays to fill the entire screen. But what it actually shows, the bits you can see if you squint a bit, not even that actually, in some scenes it's actually quite viewable, what you're seeing is a game that looks realistic. Quake 2 is not realistic. The enemies look like clay blobs, but with ray tracing they look like the most realistic clay blobs you've ever seen in a video game. It makes, well, things like the Neverhood seem a bit CGI-ish by comparison. Well, I may be exaggerating here, but it's not that the game has super duper textures or anything like that. No, it's just the lighting. The lighting alone sells it on being real. And if we can achieve that with something that doesn't look like Quake 2 does for us today, that is astonishing. That is outstanding. And according to the marketing definition, that is the next big thing. Ray tracing is being pushed as the thing to have. The thing to own, the thing that will define the new generation of consoles, I presume. I mean, if AMD is actually working on something, which they haven't really shown much, well, they have announced that they're using it in the pro sector, but nothing on the gaming side. But if they're building it into the GPUs of the next consoles, then it may be a thing. May. Not saying it will be a thing. It may be just, you know, an option, something that is gonna be there, but not a lot of people will actually use because the major installation base doesn't have access to it. And judging from the leaked prices of the new Nvidia cards, very few people will have access to it. Basically nobody. We're talking cards costing upwards of $1,000. And not the Titans, but the TI. That used to be like, what, $700 or $800 at best. That is VR level money, meaning that it's gonna be amazing for very few people with very limited options or variety in what exactly you have at your disposal in terms of experiences. Because the developer, most developers will not go full hog on the ray tracing if they know that there's not going to be any tangible benefit to most of the people playing them. Again, unless this is going to be built into the next console generation. If it is, it's going to be everywhere because you're going to have an install base for it guaranteed. If not, maybe in another 10 years we're going to be at a level where we're going to have the hardware necessary to actually do this, because there is some skepticism currently from some developers saying that the hardware is not yet there. Now, I'm not sure if they're privy to the information of all the details of NVIDIA's new technology, new architecture. If they're not, look, they may be wrong, but if they are, well, we may get some ray tracing elements this year, and the actual thing may be sometime in the next decade. So closes another edition of the Gaming Codex. Come back next time when we'll talk about a brand new subject. Goodbye.